You know, we used to be a real country. This is a thermal optic. Thermal optics give you the ability to see heat signatures of everything around you. No shit. And while drones and missiles have gotten all the attention when it comes to the things that will kill you the most category, I want to make the argument that thermals have changed warfare just as much as kamikaze quadcopters or fancy new rifles. If one side has thermals and the other doesn't, the side with the thermals is going to win every single time. White hot the like and subscribe button and let's talk about it. Please, because I cannot monetize this video. It's in the thing. Okay, let's talk about it. There are tons of thermals out there, and to start us off, I'm going to be showing you mine. This is the 335R from DNT Optics. It's intended to be mounted directly to a rifle like you see here. So first, let's see what it looks like shooting this thing. Okay, turns out paper targets are not in fact exothermic, and therefore cannot be seen well with a thermal optic. Don't blind fire at public ranges, boys and girls. I am a trained professional with no regard for others' safety, and that's why it's okay that I did it. Now, I live in a city, so I don't have easy access to places to go hunting with this thing and show you what engagements would look like with live rounds. I also don't have friends, so I can't do the thing where I send someone off in the distance and try to have them hide from it for a fun little video bit. But because I do live in a city, I have a plethora of one resource I can use: unsuspecting people around me. As you can see, it is very, very easy to see people from very far away. And because this particular site has a built-in laser rangefinder, I know just how far away exactly. For reference, I am filming this at night well past sundown. Of course, I could just be lying about that if I wanted to. You have no reason to believe if I'm telling the truth right now or not. For all you know, it very well could be noon, and that I looted this footage from one of the many schizophrenics that wander the streets of Austin, Texas. Does it really matter? Well, not in this context, plus the schizo's footage I did steal was out of focus and I just couldn't use it. One thing you're seeing more and more of is this highlight detection. So on this scope, those portions are red. You typically see that for things like people or cars. It's fairly basic on a civilian-grade thermal like this one, but on things like fusion optics the military uses like ENVGs, it can identify and outline specific shapes and targets in a way that preserves the detail of night vision while keeping the easy ident of thermals. Thermals can give you a lot more information than just how hot or cold something is or isn't. For example, you can see the differing temperature ranges on the hoods of cars based on how recently they were on. That might not be useful in a war setting necessarily, but I don't have a war nearby me, so I'm sharing what I got. Legal disclaimer, and hopefully it is obvious, I removed the optic from the rifle for that part. You know, I might be radicalized by the internet, but not in the shooting strangers way, more in the I for some reason think this picture is funny way. Now, one important thing I think I should point out is that this right here is not night vision. It has night vision capabilities, but it's digital. It's not what you and I would think of as traditional night vision. Night vision operates by amplifying ambient light. Thermals only detect differences in the temperature of objects. So for example, what you're seeing here are two shots from the same location. One is at night and the other is during the day. Just ignore the timestamp, I don't know how to change that. Thermals can also be used in areas of zero ambient light, which is very, very, very useful. Night vision, as cool and useful as it is, still needs some light in order to work. What you're seeing right here is not a still black image, it is a live video feed of night vision recording on the inside of my closet, which I do not plan to leave anytime soon. But even if you're outside, you can still be in situations where there isn't any light to amplify in the first place. It might be super cloudy outside or a new moon perhaps. You could be sitting underneath some particularly heavy tree canopies, or simply you're inside of a building with the lights turned off. With this thing though, you wouldn't have to worry about that at all. Both night vision and thermals detect infrared light. That is what heat signatures are after all. But they do it in different ways, because they look at different parts of the electromagnetic spectrum. This is not a picture of the electromagnetic spectrum, this is what AI thinks the electromagnetic spectrum is. And this is what AI thinks it would look like if it was Chinese. Night vision can see in the near infrared, which is this portion of the actual EMS. And this is why they can see IR lasers on the end of rifles, and dumbasses that use the iPhone Face ID in combat zones. Thermals like this look at the mid and long wave infrared, which is specifically the radiation giving off by heat, and because that's all it sees, it makes finding heat signatures very, very easy. There's no other visual information to mentally filter out. Now, night vision and thermals both have pros and cons. Personally, I would pick thermals over nods in the majority of situations, but they're not perfect. One big thing is that thermals cannot see through transparent surfaces. The biggest thing that means is that you can't look through windows. Even if I can see something inside perfectly with my naked eyeballs, I'm not going to be able to see anything with these. That also applies to reflections. Reading stuff is also a lot harder if even possible. Sometimes you'll be able to read things, but only if there's enough temperature contrast caused by the paint or ink reflecting light, and that's not a guarantee. You might think to yourself, Justin, why on earth would I need to do that with thermals on? I came here to stack bodies, not read a story about falling in love with a nurse in World War I. Well, if you need to read a map, perhaps, or street signs or building numbers in the dark, being able to see the actual letters and numbers is nice. You also just tend to lose a lot of general detail when it comes down to thermals, so navigating from point A to point B or picking out identifying details from a distance can be harder. Which is a big deal if you're trying to decide if that white blob is a good guy or a bad guy. One thing to keep in mind with these thermals is that while they're useful virtually 100% of the time, they're more useful in specific times as opposed to others. Winter is an especially dangerous time to try to fight an enemy with thermals. Lack of foliage means less things to try to mask your signature. Additionally, there are going to be fewer bits of wildlife running and flying around, making the white blob marker you call a body more obvious. Secondly, because everything outside is now cold, it creates a greater contrast between you and your surroundings. That doesn't mean thermals don't work in a hot summertime day environment, because they absolutely do. It's just less obvious. Now, a lot of what I've been talking about so far has been handheld thermals, things you and I would put some batteries in and walk around with like this. But vehicle thermals are an entirely other beast, and we will definitely be getting to those. But first, I want to mention the two forms of handheld thermals you'll find these days. Weapon-mounted ones like this DNT Optic, and the ones you'd find mounted on a helmet. Just like everything else, these have pros and cons. In a very loose sense, you'll find that America prefers helmet-mounted thermals, non-Western style militaries prefer weapon-mounted ones, and Europe does a mixture of the two depending on how it feels that day. That is very generalized and leaves out basically half of the human population, but last I checked, Boko Haram and Nicaraguan rebel groups are still rocking iron sights, so I apologize if that information is a little outdated. Helmet-mounted thermals like those in use by the United States are better for general use. Walking around, integrating with night vision, target identification, they're all really useful 90% of the time. Except when you have to shoot, which is kind of a big deal because that's kind of the whole point of war. That's why on bigger weapon systems you'll find dedicated thermal scopes more often, or on things like sniper rifles. Weapon-mounted thermals are literally only good for when you're shooting, or at least pointing your rifle at something you don't mind blowing away. You aren't going to be walking around on patrol looking through the scope the entire time. There are things like thermal clip-ons, which basically add on thermal capabilities when you want it, and you don't have to worry about losing battery on your main sight or losing your zero if you decide to not use thermals during the daytime. I'm not here to argue which method is better or worse. Personally, I lean towards helmet-mounted myself, but that's personal preference. Mostly because I hate walking around in the dark. It gives me the creeps and brings out the thoughts that I try to suppress with alcohol and online gambling. Also, as an American, if I see a white blob with my helmet-mounted thermals, I can just call in the first and or second largest air forces in the world to destroy it for me. So aiming my rifle is kind of a secondary priority. But in a lot of ways, thermals do one very important thing that nothing else has been able to achieve. They make the battlefield transparent. We spend billions on developing and producing camouflage for troops and gear, painting tanks and trucks green and tan, and torture soldiers by making them put on face paint that simultaneously wears off after 2 seconds and also doesn't wash even after 2 showers. Snipers spend the majority of their career practicing how not to be visually seen, and active camo is still one of the more OP pickups in Halo. Thermals do not care about any of that at all. It doesn't matter if you're in a tuxedo or a ghillie suit, they're going to be able to see you, and see you very, very clearly. This has forced militaries to try to figure out how to keep their heat signatures hidden. Certain ad hoc methods are being used like specialized tarps or nets, but I've also been enjoying seeing people do things like trying to wear trash bags in combat scenarios. Specialized camo add-ons for vehicles like the Barracuda Net are advertised as multispectral camo, which is just a fancy way of saying it tries to insulate heat from escaping outside, and I'm sure we'll be seeing individual smaller versions of this. But sometimes these come with a critical problem. Some reports have been made that some of these camos have actually worked too well, like Russian blankets that trap so much heat they actually appear as too cold from the outside. Some people reporting on this were a little less nice about it and called them huge ass stupid, which was actually my nickname when I was 13. Just like drones, thermal imagers have become a decisive piece of tech on modern battlefields. Now, instead of being able to sneak up on your enemy that might have only had night vision, you're going to be spotted from hundreds of yards or miles away even. Of course, combining thermals and drones is a match made in hell. After the war started, Ukrainian businesses scrambled to come up with cheaper thermal imagers, specifically for drones, to retrofit existing ones with IR viewing capabilities. Ones like the Kurbas, which spawned from a need by Ukraine's military, cost as little as $250 per unit and can be cranked out by the thousands. Hiding from night vision is fairly easy. Just lay low, stay still, and be camouflaged. But hiding from thermals is damn near impossible for one very simple reason. Heat has to go somewhere. It's simple physics. The refrigerator in my kitchen, keeping the expired Chinese takeout cold, only keeps it cold because it's dumping heat somewhere else. Even if something is able to hide a thermal signature for a little bit, eventually that heat is going to start showing. So no, the mud thing from Predator does not work, at least not for any meaningful amount of time. Sorry Arnie, I don't make the rules. That's also why you might think intuitively if it's raining, the water would essentially cool off your body enough to hide you, but that thermal energy is just being transferred to the water that's just now in your clothes, which is in fact very visible. Plus, rain isn't enough water anyway. You'd have to literally be completely submerged in order to hide from thermals. It's still an option, but you'd probably be better off fighting the thing looking at you rather than trying to see how long you could hold your breath for. There have been some advancements done for thermal camo, so things like the CV9120 tank that makes a thermal signature look like something else, which is useful in the sense that it would allow heat to be redirected to concentrated points for longer periods of time rather than trying to mask the whole thing at once. However, if you're just scanning no man's land with your thermals and you see a sedan-shaped object in the middle of a war zone that is also registering at roughly the boiling point of water, it doesn't take a genius to figure out what you're actually looking at. This idea of a transparent battlefield also gets a lot harder when you consider that drones are everywhere and they all have thermals now. You can sit in a trench with perfect camouflage so that even overhead night vision sights couldn't find you, but all it takes is one from-the-sky glint and your ass is grass. I never understood that phrase because to me grass is nice. I assume it's because you die and then you turn into grass, but I don't know. I feel like that doesn't communicate the urgency upon which that phrase is supposed to mean. And the same goes with ass is toast. While individual thermal sights for soldiers or on the little flying nightmares we call drones might seem like a relatively new thing or something that's only been seen sparingly in the last 20 years, they've actually been around for a hot minute, specifically in vehicles. Thermals started getting more attention by the military in the 60s and 70s, and it made perfect sense to try them out on vehicles primarily. Thermals take a lot of power, a lot. Even today, the most modern thermal sights eat batteries like a fat kid eats candy. Vehicles have engines. Engines can produce a lot of electricity for stuff, so problem solved in that department at least. It also allowed them to be bigger, meaning they would be able to collect more visual information to display. They're also particularly useful for things like tanks. Situational awareness inside those things suck penis, so giving yourself a leg up to see more targets and from farther away is a huge advantage. The first American tank to get thermals was the M60A3 TTS, or Tank Thermal Sight, starting in 1979. The M2 Bradley and M1 Abrams that followed also had thermal sights as standard. Compared to today, these weren't the best exactly, but thermal sight is better than no thermal sight, especially if the other guy ain't got one. That would become very, very apparent, and violently so, to the Iraqis in the first Gulf War. Abrams, Bradleys, and Apache helicopters all had thermal sights as standard, and Saddam's army quite literally could not see anything, especially at long ranges. And we all know how that went for both sides. But this is weirdly enough one of my biggest gripes when it comes to video games, if you can believe it, because you're typically playing with daytime sights as standard, which is fine, gameplay and all that. But if you're in an armored vehicle in real life and you have thermals, that's what you're looking through 99.9% of the time, drivers included. Also, white hot is the only way to run thermals. If you are a black hot kind of person, please unsubscribe and block me on Instagram. The actual sights on those earlier American vehicles were all different, like the VSG-2 for tanks and VAS-5 for Bradleys, but they all fell into the category of first-generation thermals. By the mid-90s, second generation started popping up, and these had better resolution and visual range. When I say resolution here, I mean both the literal resolution of the screen you're looking at, but also the thermal resolution. Thermal resolution refers to how small the differences in temperature an imager can detect, which just gives off an overall clearer picture. Now, instead of just a blob, you can actually see that what you're looking at is a vehicle with details for visual identification. Around this time, handheld thermals still lacked a bit of the pizzazz we would expect out of them today. Handheld ones have existed for a while, but up to and including the last couple of decades, they've been big, bulky, and heavy, to the point where a lot of troops just don't even bother with the hassle. But now we have thermal clip-ons, PSQ-20s, and ENVGs that can do all the thermal stuff we want with minimal headaches. Metaphorical headaches. Wearing these things on my neck still gave me a headache. These days, you'll find third-generation thermals in American vehicles. These not only allow for even more resolution, but are better at fusing the image with other sensors like night vision. One of the biggest developers of these kinds of sights you would find is the French company Thales, named after the ancient Greek philosopher of the same name. For some reason, the company name is pronounced Thales, but the human's name is pronounced Thales. Fun fact, Thales believed that earthquakes came from waves and that magnets had souls because you could move stuff with them. That was a little throwback from when this used to be a philosophy channel, and that's not even a joke. Go look at my older videos. Anyway, Thales, the company, not the man, produces the Catherine FC thermal imager, which is coincidentally the one used in the Russian Sosna U tank sight, which you'll find in everything from BMPs, BMDs, and every T-series tank. That might not make sense because France was also threatening to send troops to fight in Ukraine, meaning they'd be fighting against the tanks that they helped build, but global economics means parts from all over the world tend to find themselves in weird places. The French also built the missiles that sank the British HMS Sheffield in the Falklands War, as well as invented the two-guy, one-girl threesome. Go figure. The Sosna U sight is a second-generation level thermal. Not as nice as what us Americans get to play around with, but still plenty good to fight a conventional war with. Despite most military exports to Russia being stopped in 2014 after the invasion of Crimea, an internal report from French defensive offices stated that deliveries of Thales sights to Russian tanks never actually stopped. Since 2014, destroyed Russian vehicles have been found with French thermal sights left and right. Through a series of shell companies, rebranding, and shady corporate practices, Thales figured out how to continue supplying these sites up until 2018, and they are still being found in burnt-out hulls of BMPs and T-90s today. Today, at least officially, the Russian military has been forced to produce their own thermal imagers rather than rely on the Frenchies for it, and by all reports, these are slightly worse in terms of overall quality, but again, still firmly in the good enough category to be used in a real fight. So what does the future of thermal sights look like? Well, firstly, they're vastly increasing in number. Like all tech, smaller, more affordable thermals are hitting both the military and civilian market, which is great if you're in charge of defense finances for a large country. Not so great if said country wouldn't have to fight non-state actors that didn't even have night vision a few years ago. This is leading to more and more militaries having to worry about thermal signatures. So if you were worried that you would still enjoy being alive in total noise, light, and network discipline blackouts, now you get to worry about being tracked by a thermal drone because a warm fart traveled outside the thermal tarp cover. Germany just got a ton of the AIM Hunter IR thermal sights for rifles, as did Denmark, the UK, and Sweden. Over the past year, so August of 2024 until today, the US has spent $132 million on individual soldier thermals as well. It's worth noting that the vast majority of these purchases from different countries aren't replacing old units. They're equipping people with thermals for the first time. And this is reflected in Chinese and Russian spending numbers as well. My point in all this is that drones can be jammed or blocked, missiles can be intercepted and shot down, but you can't stop a tank engine or a human being from producing heat. Well, you can, I guess, with like a bullet or an ATGM, but that's a little counterproductive to use on your own troops, but what do I know? And on that note, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed today's video. Please subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.